Namu Myoho Renge Kyo. Namu Myoho Renge Kyo. Namu Myoho Renge Kyo. Okay, hi everyone. Namo Myoho Renge Kyo. Hope you guys are healthy and safe. Barring any more audio difficulties, we're going to be good for another day. It's a little gloomy today out here. I'm not going to lie to you. My mood's not as peppy as I would like. I've been having a lot of trouble sleeping, so I apologize if I seem a little droopy. We've been talking about the Satipatthana. I think by now we realize that Shakyamuni is working diligently to, so far has been teaching that the body, as we observe it here in Samsara, and the mind, as we usually take for granted, but as we can observe it in this Samsara, are not the same. They're not originated, formed the same. They don't exist the same. They don't endure the same way. They don't decay the same way. They don't dissolve or dissolve in the same way. He's making this point at first simply as a statement that the body is a vehicle, a machine, to provide the instantiation of this mind, but that the mind is an emergent property of consciousnesses. Consciousnesses, brain, body, that is a conditioned construction. So they have different origination. And then he goes deeply into this body. Look, you think of your body the way you think of it now, but understand, look at a cemetery. Look at the butcher. Look at the way the body is constructed of this viscera, right? Of mucus and blood and vessels and solid, right? Materiality is the word he continuously uses, or the translation would have us use. And then we look at the cemetery and how the body decomposes, decays into dust. Assuming 3,000 years ago they didn't have microscopes, dust might be the powder of the body, is the most distant conception of the body for a conscious being, right? And so it comes from these minuscule components, energy, work, karma, builds to the point of creating this body with arms, legs, ears, eyes, all of these components necessitating instantiation in order to what? In order to provide some means of detection for experience. But there's a separate holder of what that is, experience. It emerges out of this tremendous energy and combinatory energies to manifest these. What does something look like? What does something sound like? How do I make sound? How do I touch, feel? All of those senses, which we call consciousnesses, they are consciousnesses because the senses, right? The skandhas, the senses, lead to an experience. That's a separate thing. The consciousness is the mind's work using the tools of the senses. They're separate things. They're different things, and they manifest through a different path, causal path. The body is material, the mind is not. It's energy. It's perception of experience via energy. And so this is the beginning point for understanding the development of mind as a separate development to the development of body. That the two will always be a duality. Never the same, never fully disconnected. Related, but not of the same origin and not for the same purposes. This is the beginning steps toward understanding that the condition of Buddha is always there. We need receptors to experience the physicality, the materiality of the life process, but to understand and experience it unattached, unbuoyed and tossed side to side by the vicissitudes and influences of materiality, our mind, being a separate thing of it in and of itself, can experience and observe and appreciate this grand play of energy. So, the Satipatthana moves on. We've separated the body from the mind. So now, let's talk about the contemplation of feeling, which would be one of those tendrils of attachment of mind to body, right? Depends on how you define feeling. So let's see what he says. And how, O bhikshus, does a bhikkhu live contemplating feeling in feelings? How do you feel about your feelings? How do your feelings feel? How, why, what is feeling? What is that connection? What is that really going on? Here, O bhikshus, a bhikkhu, when experiencing a pleasant feeling, understands, quote, I experience a pleasant feeling. When experiencing a painful feeling, he understands, I experience a painful feeling. There's that identifying self all the time, right? When experiencing a neither pleasant nor painful feeling, he understands, I experience a neither pleasant nor painful feeling. When experiencing a pleasant worldly feeling, he understands, I experience a pleasant worldly feeling. When experiencing a pleasant spiritual feeling, mental, he understands, I experience a pleasant spiritual feeling. When experiencing a painful worldly feeling, he understands, I experience a painful worldly feeling. When experiencing a painful spiritual feeling, he understands, I experience a painful spiritual feeling. When expressing a neither pleasant nor painful worldly feeling, when experiencing a neither pleasant nor painful spiritual feeling, he understands, I experience neither a pleasant nor a painful spiritual feeling. Thus, he lives contemplating feelings in feelings internally, or he lives contemplating feelings in feelings externally, or he lives contemplating feelings in feelings internally and externally. He lives contemplating originating feelings, things in feelings, or he lives contemplating dissolution, things in feelings, Or he lives contemplating origination and dissolution, things in feelings. Or his mindfulness is established with the thought, feeling exists to the extent necessary just for knowledge and remembrance, and he lives independent and clings to naught in the world. Thus, indeed, O bhikshus, a bhikkhu lives contemplating feeling and feelings. Okay, so let's review that. What, in plain English, is Shakyamuni pointing to there? So first he distinguishes between the feeling of touch. I feel this cardboard bookmark, right? I don't feel the print on it, but so I have an experience of this bookmark. What cardboard feels like, right? Feeling it. These are internal to the body feelings. The feeling of feeling is all the descriptors I add to that. This feels temperate. It feels hard but pliable. It could be sharp edges, but at the moment are rather dull. See, all these descriptors feeling the feeling, right? And then to think of, where does that originate? Where does that feeling originate? How do I come, I feel? How does that come about? How does that form? How does the formation of this feeling become an experience to me? See, now we're mixing mind and body again, right? But the point is that these monks already know about the skandhas, the nidana, the formations of this feeling, the formations, the karma, the energy, the work that was put into that sensation that we would then feel had to create this skin and the nerve endings and the connection to the brain, and made an apparatus in order to then be able to feel. And as I grow older, this apparatus of feeling will decay and eventually will dissolve and no longer feel. Right? That's a internal bodily realization of Buddhism. Externally, the mind can conceive of this feeling and the apparatus to feel, and its arising, its endurance, its decay, and its eventual dissolution. But the mind is not the apparatus. The mind is the perceiver of the accomplishment of the karmic desires, agglomerations of the apparatus to feel. And the mind goes, oh, it's working. It's feeling. It. Not I. It. Of course, that's a step a little too far for the monks at this juncture, but he's getting there. Internal, how this works. External, how do I experience it? Right? And then, just because you're going to raise your hand and ask a question, oh dear monk, what about when you feel emotions? What's the apparatus for that? That becomes a little bit more cagey. So, in this translation, the word spiritual is used. Spiritual has a lot of charisma around it, doesn't it? Religions love to use it. but also other non-religion practices, New Age, yoga, you name it. There's several practices that use the word spiritual. And although they too imbue it with some sort of a higher self, whatever that is, something other than self, in other words, that's still somewhat mystical. So I resist using the term spiritual. But let us say that for the purposes of Buddhism, when we're speaking about spiritual things, we are speaking of our mental experience, a real thing that is not of the apparatus of the body, but emergent from this totality of this machine for being, because that's what the body is. A machine whose sole imperative is to be. The secondary imperative is to be in order to sense, which is what drove it to be in the first place. So these are the attachments. Because this instantiation of body is this huge karmic freight train of desires of experience. But it's not itself an experiential apparatus. Although the mind supports that function. So the first things we're doing in the Satipatthana is simply breaking down this connection of mind-body, where it can be observed in its instantiation, its arising, its endurance, its decay, its dissolution, understanding that that is one system, and that it is integrated in that the emergent mind, from its strong karmic energies, to witness, to bear witness to its accomplishment, is just as much identified by us in samsara as part of the body, which in truth it is not. It is a separate observer that we use in samsaric identification as the justification of this manifestation. Me, self, I, mine. But we need to disconnect that logic. We need to freely experience what the body is doing and its accomplishments, right on. But we can't let those accomplishments be what the mind is solely extant for. Because that relationship is rife with stress, anxiety. Do I have? Do I not have? Will I be able to? Am I not able to? All of those questions of humanness. Because of the samsaric freight train of karmic energy to be, to feel, to sense, to let's get in here and be in the muck like a kid who can't wait to run over to the swing set or the mud puddle or whatever. It's all well and good, and we laugh at our children when they play and they do these things. But the mental aspect of that is so deeply connected to the experience. Take that same child running for the swing set and pull him off the swings and see the face that you get from that kid. The sound of the wailing, the death screech, oh no! Right? That attachment is heroic in nature. It's huge. And if you interfere, you will know it. That's the human condition of mind being driven by body. This body of wanting to sense everything, to own everything, to continue to have it. And the mind is highly influenced by that. It's trained by that. We train it that way. Not just ourselves, but our parents, our environment, our society. Human beings are built of that. But that's the body driving the mind. The desires to experience are telling the mind, look at me, look at me, look at me. I'm important. This is all about me, right? What does that sound like? Our example of the monkey mind, right? All those screeching monkeys, me, 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 me. But the mind doesn't have to be completely controlled by that. Yes, that exists. But to let the mind slavishly be the audience for that is samsara, the place of anxieties, stress, suffering, pain, right? Because that's what the body's going to experience. But if you can separate, if you can take that mind and sever its influences, not its appreciation, not its observation, not its body, don't rip it apart, but enable it to see, think, experience objectively instead of subjectively, suddenly everything changes. Right? So, worldly feelings, attitudes about the government, politics, the way the neighbor behaves, the way your lover behaves, the way your dog behaves, those are feelings instantiated from the world around you, not from your own body. And yet, they're bodily because everything you associate in your bodily mind is, in effect, an extension of that body. And again, coming back to dissect all of that by the formula, the lens of arising, duration, decay, and dissolution, right? So what do you suppose this leads to? The contemplation of consciousness. Well, of course, we're building this idea of developing the mind free of the body's influences while still having the body, of course, but observing it, experiencing it differently. And how, O bhikshus, does the bhikkhu live contemplating consciousness in consciousness? How is it that I'm conscious? And what is the nature of that consciousness? How does it come about? Right? Here, O bhikkhus, a bhikkhu understands the consciousness with lust, as with lust, the consciousness without lust, as without lust, the consciousness with hate, as with hate, and the consciousness without hate, as without hate, the consciousness with ignorance, as with ignorance, and the consciousness without ignorance, as without ignorance. The shrunken state of consciousness, as the shrunken state of consciousness becomes, the distracted state of consciousness as the distracted state. Oops. I hope I don't lose you guys now. I forgot to plug in. Come on, computer. Okay. Hopefully that didn't interrupt our process here. We're still recording? Yeah, okay. Apologies. The next line. The distracted state of consciousness as the distracted state. The state of consciousness becomes great as the state becomes great. The state of consciousness not become great as the state of not become great. the state of consciousness with some other mental state superior to it, as the state with something mentally higher. There's that higher self thing. The state of consciousness with no other mental state superior to it, as the state with nothing mentally higher. The quieted state of consciousness as the quieted state, the state of consciousness not quieted as the state not quieted, and the freed state of consciousness as freed, and the unfreed state of consciousness as unfreed. Okay, what are you saying? Thus, the bhikkhu lives contemplating consciousness and consciousness internally, or he lives contemplating consciousness in consciousness externally, or he lives contemplating consciousnesses in consciousness internally and externally. He lives contemplating origination things in consciousness, formations of consciousness, or he lives contemplating dissolution things, the decay and the dissolution things in consciousness. Notice the translation says dissolution things. So I don't know what the original prakrit is, but in English we have to define what it is that is originating or decaying, dissolutioning, right, are things. So this translation would lead us to believe, again, body, 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 but it's not just body, it's the formations of the samsaric desires, what you could say in English parlance, the carnal, but not carnal in having to do with sex, carnal having to do with humanity, this human being. And so this is the nature of being. You know, how does this form and how does it dissolve? So it's a reference of thingness, right? Materiality. Or his mindfulness, if you achieve this ungluing of the mind of experience without influence from the body of experience, is established with the thought, consciousness exists to the extent necessary just for knowledge and remembrance, and he lives independent and clings to naught in the world. This indeed, O bhikkhus, a bhikkhu lives contemplating consciousness in consciousness. The next session will be mental objects. Where are we? Oh, we're doing good. So didn't he not say, as repetitive, and again, it's a recitation, right? Are we getting the idea here that mindfulness is about understanding the non-birth, non-existent, non-perishing state of things? This is an extended teaching of the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Noble Path. He's broadening the self-reflexive knowledge that we are greatly influenced by this body, but that mentally, if we can disconnect our mental experience from the body experience, don't annihilate it, don't get rid of it, don't punish it. It's not bad. It's just that your mental experience of the life process is so desperately connected to everything the body feels, understands, even the mind of the body, if you will. There is a mind of mind. There is a mind that can experience all of this without all of that tumultuous attachment. So he's trying to use verbiage to distance the thinking. And he's saying, Well, I'm obviously conscious. Let's go back to the card. I'm conscious of this happening. I'm conscious of my body doing all of the things necessary to put the implementation of my skin on my fingers, right? I didn't do this. I could have. I feel the card. But that's inefficient because I built these to do that. And of course, if you're young enough, right? All of it, though, isn't about that. It's not about the card. It's not about the apparatus. It's about the end result. And here's a confounding aspect of this. You could say, well, the end result is knowing how this feels. But if you say that's the end result, then you're deeply stuck in samsara because everything is about the apparatus. And if there's one thing that Shakyamuni's trying to drive home here is that this whole sensation, skandhas, consciousness, the whole formation of it, the existence of it, like in the cemetery, I have not escaped this realm yet. This is just something that you were designed to do and experience in samsara. But the liberated mind says there is feeling, there is consciousness here, and there is a consciousness within it that is samsaric, earth-bound, body-bound, and there's a consciousness of this interesting desire to seek out this experience as a separate consciousness, an observational consciousness, a consciousness fully aware that this passion play is going on with feeling and the apparatus and the way it came about and the way it goes away, but not connected to it, simply observing. Isn't that entertaining? Look at all those monkeys having fun. They're not screaming at me. They're just playing. They're having a good time. Isn't that wonderful? Right? A separate consciousness of consciousness. A consciousness that is derived from the apparatus, the desire to be, the desire to delineate, identify, and scooping all that in as a me. There's another consciousness above that, below that, the Amala consciousness, that just sees it as, isn't that fascinating? Look at all those little consciousnesses at work. Look at all those skandhas at work. All of that's just going to make you miserable ultimately. You'll get momentary pleasures out of it, like getting to the swing set and immediately starting to cry because you can't make the swing go. So you got to scream and bawl and yell to get somebody to push you so you can enjoy the swing. Completely slaving to your desires. But you can also be that little kid standing in the grass, looking upon yourself. Says, look at me having fun. Oh, look at me so tortured that I'm not getting any assistance. Oh, you need to learn not to do that. It's just making you miserable. Right? You follow? So let's go on. Let's do one more. The contemplation of mental objects. The 5 hindrances. Interesting. And how, O bhikkhus, does a monk live contemplating mental objects in mental objects? What is the nature of a mental object? Here, O bhikkhus, a bhikkhu lives contemplating the mental objects in the mental objects of the 5 hindrances. So the mental objects are or arise from these hindrances. This is a long one. Probably should do a separate video for it. Even before we get to it, I will tell you that number 2 is the 5 aggregates of clinging. So, this is what I've been talking about. The 6 internal and 6 external sense bases, right? The lower worlds, if you will. But this is all about the skandhas, the 7 factors of enlightenment. This is going to get pretty profound here. So I think I'm going to cut this one short because maybe I'll just read the introductory paragraph 1, the 5 hindrances. Let's do that. And then we'll save the second point of the 5 aggregates of clinging for the next video, okay? How, O bhikkhus, does a bhikkhu live contemplating mental objects in the mental objects of the 5 hindrances? Here, O bhikkhus, when sensuality is present, a bhikkhu knows with understanding, I have sensuality. Or when sensuality is not present, he knows with understanding, I have no sensuality. So mental objects, you can see, are objects that arise in the mind, even though they may be manifest of desires or needs in the body, or they arise in the body from stimulus outside the body. Nevertheless, they are mental objects. They're conjurings of the mind of tendencies and conditions occurring around us, through us. Make sense? I have no sensuality. He understands how the arising of the non-arising sensuality comes to be. He understands how the abandoning of the arising sensuality comes to be. And he understands how the non-arising in the future of the abandoned sensuality comes to be. So that's interesting, because this is now indicating to the student, the monk, how the arising of the non-arising sensuality comes to be. So there's an implicit understanding there that sensuality doesn't come to be on its own. It needs an apparatus to come to be. So the arising of the non-arising sensuality, a condition of mind that is ephemeral, that it's a construct of mind, that it isn't precipitant of any kind of natural process other than desire, the body, the brain, the apparatus of the understanding, the experience of body in samsara brings about sensuality. He understands how the abandoning of the arising sensuality comes to be. When you talk yourself out of your sexual excitement in an inappropriate situation, whatever that might be. You understand the process, the shutting down of, right? And he understands how the non-arising in the future of the abandoned sensuality comes to be. Now that I've fought my sensuality out of my experience, how will that affect my instantiation, the arising of that sensuality in the future? And there's the formula for anxiety right there, right? When anger is present, he knows with understanding, I have anger. We know when we're pissed off, right? But also anger in Buddhism is a desire to manipulate, overcome, misdirect, influence, for our own ego, our own personal gain. That's the world of anger, right? When anger is present, he knows with understanding. Doesn't just know, in other words, experience, but with understanding the process, the arising, the enduring, and the decay of these states. He knows with understanding, I have no anger. He understands how the arising of the non-arising anger comes to be. He understands how the abandoning of the arising anger comes to be. And he understands how the non-arising in the future of the abandoned anger comes to be. When sloth and torpor are present, he knows with understanding, I have sloth and torpor. Or when sloth and torpor are not present, he knows with understanding, I have no sloth and torpor. He understands how abandoning the arising sloth and torpor comes to be, and he understands how the non-arising in the future of the abandoned sloth and torpor comes to be, so on and so forth. Agitation, arising, non-arising, agitation and worry comes to be. And the fifth one, when doubt is present, he knows with understanding, I have doubt, I have no doubt. The arising of doubt comes to be. He understands how abandoning the arising of doubt comes to be, and he understands how the now non-arising in the future of the abandoned doubt comes to be. So there is a path lined out here, and I'll just, to finish this section, thus he lives contemplating mental objects and mental objects internally, or he lives contemplating mental objects and mental objects externally, or he lives contemplating mental objects in mental objects internally and externally. He lives contemplating origination things in mental objects, or he lives contemplating dissolution things in mental objects, or he lives contemplating origination and dissolution things in mental objects, or his mind is established with the thought. His mind is established. He didn't call it mindfulness this time. He simply called it the establishment of the mind. In other words, the separation of the mind from the experiential apparatus of the body. Mental objects exist, right? We have thoughts. To the extent necessary for just knowledge and remembrance, and he lives independent and clings not to this world. Thus, indeed, O bhikkhus, a bhikkhu lives contemplating mental objects in the mental objects of the five hindrances. So now he's dissecting samsaric perception. This is life. This is what life is like. And we have these conditions that arise in us, these tendencies for sexuality, sensuality, not just lust, which he's already talked about, for engagement, for the activity of procreation, but the sense of attractiveness of self, other, so on, species, sexes, right? But it's no different than anger or hate or sorrow or worry or anxieties. All of these states arise from the conditions that our samsaric life, our bodies, our brain, mind, body experiences here. But we can have a mind that understands, that sees the workings of all of this, the potential it has for future engagement, how we might disconnect from it. So he's talking about this here when he says abandoning in each of these cases. He's talking about the mind now separated, still existing with, but not influenced, not attached, not perturbed or jostled by the vicissitudes of the self, the ego, the body, but rather observes it all without, not indifference exactly. You're definitely not disinterested, which indifference would say you simply wouldn't pay attention. No, you're paying attention. Your Buddha mind is paying attention. It simply isn't affected. It's an observer with great compassion for what's happening, not dispassion. Because what's happening is a condition of samsara that's full of stress and anxiety. So as a disaffected mind, one wants to bring that other mind, if you will, or that experience, into a unstressful, unanxiety-filled understanding of its self. So there has to be a reintegration at some point. Okay, I'm separate. I see the play and the consequences of my not being connected to it, my abandoning of it. I see where that could go, but I don't want to live separate from my own life, because my life is life in general. So I have this apparatus that I can influence back with a calming and a joyful experience of samsara without feeling these tremendous anchors and motivations to act on every single little thing that goes on in my samsaric existence. Not reacting to everything, but just observing everything and making my movement through this life calm, unperturbed. Seeing it for what it is. As Nichiren would say, suffer what there is to suffer, enjoy what there is to enjoy, and at the end of the day, chant for the opportunity to be able to perceive it for what it actually is. And don't be crushed by every little thing that happens, because that's just entertainment. That's just the nature of your tendencies and conditions working out and being expressed. Don't be affected by them. Don't be so moved to the extremes of experience, because that's not what's happening. Those are momentary panics, explosions, whatever, excitements, perturbations. What was the word? Agitation, right? Be conscious. I'm being agitated right now. And with that understanding and that consciousness, de-stress it. Wow. I'm agitated. I don't need to be agitated. What is agitating? How did agitating come about? It's definitely not going to stay here. So why should I be agitated by the agitation? You see the twofold stepping here to try to separate the attachment, right? What is the anger of anger? What is, it's unnecessary. I recognize anger. I see what it looks like. I see what it feels like. But I don't need to experience that. So what is the nature that creates that anger, and how can I dispel that? So it's a completely different way of living life as an observer interacting, rather than an observer being pummeled about like a useless lens camera with no mind, no control, simply observing. I'm talking about an observer that is the mind, observing within the construct of all of this. And this is what Nichiren, Shakyamuni is trying to explain. So then he's going to go into the 5 aggregates of clinging. That's a rather short little stanza, actually. But we're going to save that for tomorrow, because we've gone on long enough today. I hope this is making sense. This is an early teaching, trying to cultivate a mind of understanding how the mind and body work together in samsara. What functions, what creates, what persists, nothing, and what dissolves. And sometimes what dissolves is your understanding or your attachment to something that's only arisen and now decaying and dissolving. It kind of detaches your mind. It changes your thinking from this is happening to me to what an interesting thing that is happening. It's a constructed thing. It indicates certain tendencies and conditions of self, ego, and I don't need to be invested in that, but I do observe it. I don't deny it. I'm just not invested in it. So it doesn't affect me. Me being the separate mind, the enlightened mind, right? All right. Lots of words. Going to end here. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being a part of this. And hopefully I can wrap this up tomorrow because, well, tomorrow's Saturday. So Sunday we'll do another Gongyo and we'll start, what's this? Nagarjuna's Middle Way. Mika. Karika. It's a long word. And we'll see how all of this connects. It's interesting. There's a ton of verbiage here, all trying to describe the same puzzle of existence and how we can live it fully, but free ourselves of the anxieties and stress that all of these connections and attachments seem to occur. How do we navigate that mental difference? So until tomorrow, I leave you with that thought, and I'm thanking you very much, profusely, for being here. Like, subscribe, share, all that stuff. Those of you who are able to support this endeavor, you're amazing. Please continue to do so. Encourage others to do so if they can. And we'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.